Hi, this is Julian Plumley from Endoxa Learning. Welcome to this presentation about the application of Endoxa Learning to vocational subjects. Critical thinking is an important life skill that everyone needs to learn, like reading and writing. Our mission is to enable everyone to think critically. Let's look at the definition of critical thinking. In this definition, reasonable means you have to employ reasoning and give an argument for what you think. Reflective means thinking things through for yourself, actively asking questions and finding information, rather than passively accepting what you are told. Argument is at the centre of critical thinking, analysing and evaluating arguments and making your own argument for your own conclusion. Critical thinking is also a value-laden activity. Learning to think critically instills and practices these values. A few academic subjects are pure critical thinking, for example, philosophy or history. Vocational subjects are part practical skills and part thinking skills. It is necessary to be able to gather information, consider the arguments, form an opinion, and be able to state it clearly. This is true no matter the subject being learned. Critical thinking, complex problem solving, and creativity were identified as the three most important 21st century work skills by the World Economic Forum. We might say these are the how not to be replaced by a robot skills. We would all like students to finish school or college with robust thinking skills, but this isn't the case. Critical thinking skills are lacking amongst students entering the workforce. But why is critical thinking hard to learn? As we have seen, argument is the focal point for critical thinking, but students are often good at learning facts, but poor at organising their thinking. The issue is that prose is not the optimal way of representing arguments. Prose makes no distinction between the sentences which are part of the argument and those which do other things, such as supporting facts and context. You cannot look at prose and see how an argument works. So argumentative prose imposes a very high cognitive load on the student, making it hard to understand and hard to write. Endoxa Learning visualizes arguments in a diagram called an argument graph. This makes arguments easier to understand. Here you see one step of an argument graph. Here are several steps of an argument. You see the structure of the diagram is the structure of the argument. Facts and context do not clutter the diagram, but are available by clicking buttons. Let's look at an example. This is about a famous article by Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman, which might be part of a business or economics course. Here is part of the article. The whole thing is 3,000 words long. To find out the argument he is making, you need to read the whole thing and then analyse it, which is very complex. Here is an argument graph which summarises Friedman's argument in 150 words. Any extra information, such as background info and supporting facts, are available by clicking the little brain icons. There is a wealth of academic research that supports this approach. It is known that using argument diagrams improves critical thinking outcomes. The argument graph makes reasoning precise. There is no waffle and bad reasoning is easy to spot. You can read our white paper and read more about this. So let's switch to the Endoxa Learning software. This is a web app which runs in your browser, so you don't need to download or update any software. So let's look at A-level business content, which should be adaptable to vocational courses such as BTECs. Endoxa Learning is not just a drawing package to analyse arguments. The system is like a library of textbooks covering all aspects of the subject. Students learn a subject by going through key arguments step by step. Then they modify the argument graph with their own ideas. So I'm going to open our lesson on the Friedman argument, which I mentioned earlier. The argument graph appears in the centre. The lesson stages are at the bottom. Signposting is on the left. I can click this box to read the background to the argument. Here is the first step of the argument. It flows top down from the premises to the conclusion. They are joined by an argument type box, which shows what kind of reasoning is being used. You can click on the brain icons for extra information, quotes, and explanations. The conclusion of one step becomes a premise of the next, so the argument is developed as a chain of argument steps. This is a thinking task. The student has to understand how the argument step works to get the answer right. We can deploy a wide variety of tasks to check the student's reasoning. Each argument type has critical questions that help the student to think further about the reasoning. Here are the critical questions for this argument step. A student can disagree with a statement using this true-false slider. They can also make notes and comments. These comments can be seen by the teacher using their dashboard. The argument terminates at its final conclusion, in this case, that managers should not do corporate social responsibility. The student earns points for their progress through the lesson, and these points can be seen by the teacher in their dashboard. The lesson contains summary pages with quiz questions that test knowledge. We'll skip over the rest of the argument now and go to the last stage where the student can edit the argument graph and make it reflect their own view. Any changes the student has made during the lesson are now visible. The student can modify the argument or add new arguments. So, for example, I've added this statement, which I can connect to this argument step and support it. The student's argument graph can then be sent to the teacher for review. So, in summary, this is a new way of teaching the thinking parts of a subject, not a separate course in critical thinking requiring extra lessons to be timetabled. Topics are introduced by presenting the main arguments and getting students to grapple with them. The idea is to improve the critical thinking of the whole cohort by immersing them in a critical approach to the subject. There is a lot of flexibility in this approach. The lesson can contain all the arguments and factual knowledge for a topic, replacing textbooks and other sources. It can be used as an introduction or a summary for a topic, For example, the student could go through the Friedman argument and then read the paper themselves. Or it can even be a blank page where the student has to create their own argument from scratch. The main benefit is improved critical thinking skills for the student. Argument graphs model what a good argument looks like to the students and provide a framework for them to create their own strong and coherent arguments, avoiding waffle and weak reasoning. The second benefit is time saving. Testing of critical thinking and knowledge is automated using tasks and quizzes, and it is a lot quicker for a teacher to assess the student's thinking by looking at their argument graph than by reading an essay. This is also true for the student. Once they have learned how the diagrams work, they can get to grips with the issues in a topic quickly, and the student's own argument graph can be reused as an essay plan or as a revision plan for the topic. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please email us at info@endoxalearning.com.